What's up, everybody? We are back with some more UFC DFS picks, DraftKings MMA DFS advice, picks, best bets, lineup strategies, everything you need for UFC 293. That's right. Israel Adesanya, Sean Strickland, 12 fights on the card out there in Australia. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder at Occupy Fantasy, and I'm joined, as always, by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, a little bit of a later start for a change after the last couple of slates, so some breathing room. How you doing today?
Good, man. Yeah, appreciate the evening start time, man. Those early start times are brutal for getting all the DFS stuff together.
Dude, absolutely brutal. So this is a live stream. We'll be here 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the questions that you ask. You see the chat box here to the right of the YouTube screen. Go ahead and ask your questions in there. We will stop our typical schedule, answer your questions, get back into the routine. Speaking of which, we'll break down the main event, Adesanya versus Strickland, what it means for betting in DFS. We will talk about the newcomers on the card. We have 5, break down their backgrounds, what we can expect in their debut tonight. Then we'll play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for those fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC to give some context to their stats. And then we'll give a prize picks play, our favorite prize picks play. We will give a fight that you have to target for DFS, and we will give our stream parlay of the week. Well, I'll take a prop, Jake will take a prop, we'll parlay it together. I think this is a Lambo week and not a Volt week. So let's hope we hit the stream parlay this week. So there's a teaser there to stick around until the end. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. If you're watching this on replay, you can always, probably because it's starting so late, hop in our Discord server to ask any final questions. So, Jake, Adesanya's got the belt back, fighting against Strickland. Everyone is expecting Izzy to win here. Betting markets obviously agree. Biggest favorite on the card. What does it mean for betting in DFS? How do you expect this fight to play out? And most importantly, what's it mean for our lineups?
Yeah, man. I mean, normally we would spend a bunch of time like breaking down the fight, but it seems pretty obvious. Adesanya coming in -700 favorite. Like even on the poll I put up on Twitter, normally it's just like which guy's gonna win. This week it was like, all right, Adesanya by decision, Adesanya by KO, or like Strickland, bullshit win. Um, and yeah, like I think it really that's the question is does Adesanya win a decision? Does he get a knockout? I mean, sure, like it's a fight, anything can happen, injuries happen. We're not going to completely say that it's impossible for Sean Strickland to win, but man, this is the toughest matchup that Strickland could probably ask for. Yeah, I mean the thing with Adesanya where people are normally like, oh well, maybe he'll get knocked out or maybe he'll get wrestled. Strickland can wrestle, but he refuses to, and he doesn't really have knockout power. His game is to out volume people. Like that's how he wins basically all of his fights. Other than the last one against Avis, where the guy just gassed out in the second round. It's basically a volume game with Strickland, and the idea that he's going to come in and outland, it's going to be hard for Strickland to pull off his normal game where he's just landing a ton of volume. So I think Adesanya is going to win. No hot take on that. And then it's just, does he knock him out or does he outland his way to a decision? And typically with Adesanya, when he's winning decisions, he's not scoring very well. He's only averaged 82 DraftKings points in his 6-5 round decision wins in the UFC. Not very good. He only topped 86 in one of those, and it was the Kelvin Gastelum fight where he landed 4 knockdowns and scored 117 points. So I mean, do the math. A knockdown's worth 10 points. He wouldn't have scored well even with 1 knockdown, with 2 knockdowns. I mean, really needed an outlier performance there. So for Adesanya to score well in a decision, historically he's needed a bunch of knockdowns. Maybe he can land just way more volume here. Strickland does just kind of march forward, stay in people's faces. Obviously, there's some bad blood here. They've been talking a bunch of shit to each other. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Adesanya landed, a career high in significant strikes. Whether or not that'll be enough to, return value at his super high price tag on DraftKings, different story. Even when he lands a knockout, historically they've all been coming in the second round with him. And they're scoring okay, but they're not generally putting up these huge scores. And he's the most expensive fighter on the DraftKings card, so he could easily get priced out, whether it's a knockout or a decision. But the one thing I'll say is on this card, all the expensive guys are basically strikers. We don't have a bunch of wrestlers that are going to put up these 140-point scores. So it might be a bunch of guys that score between 100 and 110 points. And at that point, it's going to come down to who outscores the other guys. Like it might be a very small margin, and yeah, he's a little bit more expensive, so he could get priced out. But it's a few hundred. We have some underdogs that are cheap, so we have some ways to save salary here. So originally, you see Adesanya, you see the high price tag, and you're just like, okay, well, easy fade the main event. I was definitely that was the first thing I thought. I'm
Right.
just like, okay, like Adesanya, I think he's been in the winning DraftKings lineup on one of the last four slates he's been on, and that was his last fight where he knocked out Pereira in the second round, and he still only scored like 96 points, but he was cheaper in that fight because Pereira had just beaten him, so it made sense. The line was pretty close, and he's still stuck in there. But you take that result on this slate with this price tag, he's not getting in the winning lineup, so he's going to need an outlier performance, but he's going to be lower owned. He's going to be significantly lower owned than your typical main event favorite, let alone your typical negative 700 main event favorite. We have that around 30% owned. Typically, guys in this situation where you're that big of a favorite in a 5-round fight, you're going to be like 50, 60% owned. So there's no real leverage in fading him, and there's actually some leverage in playing him because he's lower owned than guys like Justin Tafa, Carlos Ulberg. These guys are actually higher owned than the biggest favorite on the card who's in a 5-round fight. So I think there is some merit in hoping that Adesanya can get a ceiling performance and just get a bunch of volume, maybe get some knockdowns, maybe get a finish. I think there's a couple ways you could get there. There's more ways you can get left out. There's definitely a couple ways you can get there. So I think he's an interesting tournament play and kind of doubling back on that. It's also a 12 fight card, so we are looking for more ways to get unique with guys that are below 35% owned, and Adesanya fits that. So yeah, I mean, I think Adesanya. I think it's either going to be like a middle round knockout or a decision, just depending if Strickland can hold on. And I think he's probably going to score like 90 to 110 points. And if you play him, you're hoping for that 110, and if you fade him, you're hoping for that 90.
No, I think that's an excellent breakdown. A lot of great points when you think about the size of the card and the context of the card. All the strikers, a lot of first rounder bust guys, and the model is picking up on this. Only 2 of the 24 fighters on the card have an OF index above 100. Typically, even on 12 fight cards, we have multiple guys over 100, multiple 90 plus. Just a slate that on the surface appears lower scoring. However, because of the striking nature, there could be some quick win bonuses that throws that out of whack. But in general, despite being 9,700, this is honestly one of the better spots for Adesanya to be in to be in the optimal lineup. I even think that there's a chance the optimal isn't found if we get a bunch of dogs winning, and that could mean if you play Adesanya over another guy in the 9K range that scores, let's say it's a 5 or 6 point difference where Adesanya typically would get priced out or not be optimal, you could still win with him if the right combo sneaks by. Now, from a stylistic perspective, am I off here in thinking that this fight just plays out not necessarily in the length, but just the optics in Strickland's fight versus Pereira, where marching forward couldn't really get any volume. He was throwing, not landing, and then Pereira's just eating him up and eventually hits him with the left hook. That's how I see this fight playing out. Do you see that? Do you see that similarity?
Yeah, I think so, man. Adesanya has been kind of joking about wanting a submission. Like, he's not doing that. Like, both these guys have really good takedown defenses. I think yeah, like you said, stays on the feet. Strickland marching forward, not being like super strategic or anything. Adesanya, the one with the really good footwork, the length, the kicks. Like, he can just eat Strickland apart. And it's in the bigger cage. That benefits Adesanya. More room to move around. I mean, I think he can basically do whatever he wants in this fight.
Totally. What about low risk contests? Obviously, there's the question of stacking. And if this fight does go the distance, even though Strickland, we don't expect to have much success versus Adesanya, 5 rounds of pure striking would be useful at 6,500 for Strickland. I guess the question is, do you play Strickland? The salary savings is pretty incredible to use him. But if you do use him, do you even use Adesanya at 9,700?
I don't think you do. I think there are lots of ways that the fight stack just blows up in your face if you try to do that in low risk. So I don't mind Strickland's sacrifice play, and I could see an argument for playing Adesanya and not Strickland. I can see an argument for playing neither guy. I mean, if we get an 85, 90 point win from Adesanya where Strickland scores like 15, 20 points, like you definitely don't want to be stacking it. So yeah, it's a tricky low risk week. I think it's another bad low risk week as we talked about in the plug. So yeah, I think you can play one or the other. You don't have to, but yeah, I wouldn't stack it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. If you guys have any more questions about the main event, throw them in the chat. We're going to move on here to the 5 newcomers on the card. We'll keep this somewhat brief, give some background, their strength of schedule, where they've been fighting, the type of style that they deploy when they're fighting, and what we can expect from them in their first fight tonight. So we'll start from the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. We actually have two newcomers facing off against each other. We'll start with the underdog here, Kiefer Crosby. Talk to me about him, Jake.
Yeah, so this fight got added pretty late. I think they just didn't have enough fights in the card, so they were just
shocker
scrambling. And they just basically pulled these guys because Jafet is a city kickboxing guy, so he was local, and then Crosby's Irish guy that's been trying to get in the UFC for a while. But anyway, starting with Crosby, 33-year-old guy, 10-3 with 7 finishes. If you look at him at faceoffs, you tell it's a back knee going, so guy might be on steroids. Who knows? He definitely fights like he is. Last 4 fights have all ended in the first round. He went 2-2 in those. He's coming off a round 1 TKO win over Alex Oliveira. Yes, the washed up Alex Oliveira that had been in the UFC forever and is now somehow just scraping up money on the regional scene because he has 25 kids and has to pay for food. Pretty sad scene, but yeah, just murdered Alex Oliveira in that fight. Before that, he knocked out just this complete bum, Brian Loa Noah, who's lost 4 straight in 8 of his last 10 fights, 6-12 fighter or something, total bum. Before that, Crosby had been fighting with Bellator, but he went 4-3 and they cut him. Basically, the guy's just a wild brawler, not very durable, not very technical. It makes for super exciting fights, super fun time watching him, but he just goes crazy out there. Not that good of a fighter, just a fun fighter. Definitely good for DFS, a good style, super aggressive, throwing a ton of volume, but he's a boomer bust guy. He's going to get finished a lot, and he's going to occasionally knock people out, and it's just trying to, find the right spots where he can find a finish, but definitely a guy we're going to be looking to target both sides of for DFS.
A little Trevor Peak, maybe, in his game, based on brawling.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, he's the Irish Trevor Peak. Yeah, it's a good comp.
There we go. And his opponent, as the French would pronounce it, Jake, it is Kevin Jousset. So Kevin Jousset, Air Jousset, even some would say, in his matchup against Crosby. Talk to me about his background, his style, and how he matches up with Crosby.
I know. I'm glad you're pronouncing the names.
That's what I'm here for. You do the analysis. I got the procedural aspect of the show, and we're good to go.
You're the Anik here. So we got the 30-year-old Jousset, 8-2 with 4 finishes. Yeah, he's from France, but trains at City Kickboxing in New Zealand, which is why he's on this card. The rest of the team was coming over. This guy was probably making sandwiches, and they're like, "Yo, Kevin, you want to fight?" He's like, "Yeah." So judo black belt, but they talk about him being a good grappler, and then you go back. I know it was early in his career, but the guy got completely out grappled by Jack Della Maddalena, who's not at all known for his grappling. Complete striker. Jack took him down with every single takedown, finished him on the mat with a post round 2 doctor stoppage. That wasn't very encouraging for a guy that supposed to be a judo black belt, supposed to be a good grappler, but it was early in his career. He's done better since then. He won both the welterweight and the middleweight belts with the Hex Fight Series. But you look at the guys he was facing, and they definitely were not impressive. He won the middleweight belt against this 40-year-old guy that hadn't fought in 4 years, hasn't fought since.
It was old.
The guy looked like he. Yeah, he was old. He had short, skinny legs. He looked like he was wearing a muscle bodysuit on the top, but he was so old. And then he fought some other guy that went 2-3 in his last 5 fights. Just not that impressive. And even in that fight, just say he was getting hit. He looked pretty hittable overall. He doesn't look super dangerous. He fought the 4 straight decisions before getting a round 3 ground and pound TKO in his last fight. So he hasn't been much of a finisher, pretty low volume, definitely not someone we're generally going to be looking to target, which is, interesting because we have the opposite on the other side of this fight. But overall, just a really tall, long guy. There was a lot of kicks, decent grappler, looks for a lot of those judo throws, but largely unexciting and not a great striking defense. So I'm not very excited about Jousset, but Crosby's the opposite. So it's one of those things where it's a clash of styles, which one's going to prevail? Is it going to be who's going to dictate the pace, basically? I think it'll be interesting. It's the first fight of the card.
Honestly, potentially the best spot of Jousset's UFC career is tonight for DFS.
Right,
we could say.
Right.
So
yeah.
So just something to think about there. All right, moving on. For newcomers against Blood Diamond, we have Charles Chuck Buffalo, incredible nickname, Charles Radke. What can you tell me about Mr. Chuck Buffalo here?
Yeah, so 33 years old, only has 10 fights, five finishes. Recently won the Cage Fury FC welterweight belt in a first round submission. That's only his second round, only his second submission in his career. And his first came in his 2012 pro debut. And after that fight, he took 5 years off before coming back in 2017. So not really sure what that's about. But he's coming off a submission, but he's not really a submission guy, even though he's a BJJ black belt and a jujitsu coach at his smaller team Evolution Naples, smaller gym. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. But he can grapple. He just hasn't been looking for takedowns. The last four fights since he moved up from 155 to 170, he hasn't attempted a single takedown. He just ended up on the mat in his last fight. And then he's good on the mat looking for submissions, but he just hasn't been looking to wrestle. So it's kind of interesting that, a guy that used to fight at 155 and then moved up and can grapple, but chooses not to. But he had good power. You wouldn't really guess he was fighting at 155. I mean, super strong, big guy. He seems decent, kind of low volume, uh, well-rounded, but lower volume and not looking for takedowns isn't great for DFS. But he's a good finisher, so obviously it's a good matchup against Blood Diamond, who has been absolutely dominated on the mat in his last couple fights. I'm just really interested to see if Chuck Buffalo is going to shoot for takedowns, because you watch his last four fights, 0 takedowns. You're like, oh, he's a pure striker. And then you go back and watch his 155 fights, and he was just immediately looking to wrestle. So not really sure what that's about. I don't know if he thinks like he's facing bigger guys, they're going to be harder to take down, so he's just fine with striking. And he did get kind of dominated on the mat in one of those last four fights, but still won a split decision. Then after his last fight, he was like still pissed at the guy that controlled him on the mat, like talking a bunch of shit about him for wrestling. So it's like apparently he's like a grappler that hates grappling. So I don't know. The guy seems kind of conflicted, but pretty solid. I don't know. We'll see, man. 10 fights at 33 years old is sort of a red flag with that 5 years off too. And he had a decision loss to Austin Hubbard earlier in his career, which take that for what it's worth. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good matchup for him though.
One would think he would go the path of least resistance and wrestle against Blood Diamond, but as we've seen many times and as we've talked about many times on this show, fighters sometimes choose not to do that. So we'll have to see. Moving on, in the ninth fight against Hackparas, we have Landon Quinones, the Lone Wolf. Tell me about Quinones. What do you think about him in this matchup?
Yeah, this one will be quicker, man. This guy's terrible. 27 years old, 7-1-1, six finishes, but he's been fighting complete bums. He just went on the Ultimate Fighter, got submitted in 55 seconds in his first fight, just like immediately got stuck in a triangle. And just like, all right, this guy's terrible. And then, of course, he's the first guy they bring on other than the winners. It's like, what are you doing? But they needed a fighter on short notice after Sam Patterson dropped out. So they bring him on like 2.5 weeks notice. Very unimpressive, man. You can go back and watch one of his decisions. He got like dropped by this like basically like a child. They were fighting in like a ballroom. Like, man, it was not impressive. Doesn't have good power. Doesn't have good grappling. Yeah, I think this guy is like definitely probably not going to win a UFC fight, and definitely not going to see a second contract. With the potential that he's one of those guys where it's like, oh, you're so bad after two fights, they just like cut you and don't even let you finish your deal.
Devil's advocate. Is it possible that he couldn't have faced a less dangerous fighter than Hackparas in his debut?
Man, Hackparas is weird, man. I don't know if he's been hurt the last couple of years or what, but he used to be better. Like he
Yeah.
used to be like a good striker, and he's just been sucking lately. I know he's been like battling some injuries, but I don't know if those have been like debilitating to the point that that's why he's been just very underwhelming. I don't know, man. I think that if you look at the lines, I feel like everyone is on hack press by decision here. I think it's sort of a trap line, and I think that hack press can actually get a finish, like a very rare finish. He never finishes anybody. This is if he's ever going to get a finish. This is the fight, man. If he doesn't, if he wins the decision, cut both guys.
I mean, I agree, right? And I will say, hopefully we can clip this segment for tomorrow morning. If we win a lot of money tonight, it's going to come from this fight, Jake, right? 24% combined ownership as of your last update. On a 12-fight card, that is just insane to me. Yes, Hackparas decision machine, Quinones unknown and or sucks, but 24% for combined ownership is it's just too low. It's too low for the variance in this sport.
Yeah, I mean, Heck Prest is like this week's Brad Tavares. He's a gross guy that no one wants to play at a high price tag. But he has a good matchup. He has the potential to get a finish. He probably won't, but he should.
That's the story of under-owned guys, right? So, all right, moving on. We have one more fighter making their debut. It is Felipe Dos Santos, and he's against Manel Kopp. Short notice debut here.
Yeah, man. Could you ask for a tougher short notice debut on the other side of the world? I mean, God, just brutal. This guy's 22 years old. He turns 23 on Monday, actually. 7-0 with 5 finishes. He's coming at shoot box. Very typical shoot box style fighter. Super aggressive. Lots of striking, elbows, knees, spinning attacks mixed in. Not great wrestling. Like the guy's just, I mean, he's a beanpole. He's 5'7". He's still growing into his frame. I'm sure he's gonna have to move up a weight class eventually. But good height, good size for the division. So aggressive, just no defense whatsoever. Though gets taken down really easily, gets hit easily. But you see a lot of improvements between his last two fights. Like he at least was going for takedowns in his last fight. He landed a ton of takedowns, but they were just tackles. He was just literally just tackling his opponent and then doing nothing on the mat and then fighting in a super crazy pace and then tackling him again. I mean, it was a pretty crazy fight. Super high scoring potential for both him and his opponents in DFS. Interesting prospect. He's super young, man. I mean, they're probably bringing him on a little early. He's going to definitely have some growing pains, and I think it's going to start as he faces a ranked opponent in his first fight. Really, really tough spot. Definitely a guy we're going to be more interested in his second fight, but we're definitely looking to target both sides of his fights, and we're going to start with Kopp today.
Yeah, I guess the key question for this match will be: will Kopp, who's typically lower volume, more of a sniper, will he be able to force that balance, or is Dos Santos going to be able to force him into higher volume? And that'll be the key to either one of these guys scoring well, probably, right?
Yeah, I think so, man. Like, it's interesting with Kopp. He hasn't attempted a takedown, I want to say, in his last 4 fights, but he attempted a bunch of takedowns in his debut against Pantoja.
Yeah,
If you're going to try to take Pantoja down, then, I mean, you should have no problem taking anyone else down. So, yeah, Kopp's an idiot. Will he wrestle? Will he not? I mean, he can win this fight striking, grappling. I think he's kind of sneaky for submission here. Just based on how bad Dos Santos' takedown defense has been. And we saw Kopp almost lock up that Kimura against David Dvorak in his last fight. I don't know, man. I think Kopp is going to come in chomping at the bit here. I think he's really hungry for, he's had so many fight cancellations. I think he's going to come in and fight more aggressively. I hope he does. He's a very frustrating fighter at times. Sometimes he's way too patient, or he's like sitting there pretending to dribble a basketball and putting his hands behind his back opposed to actually looking for a finish. So we all know the deal with Kopp, man. Just prepare to be annoyed, but this is the best matchup he is ever going to have now, in the past, or moving forward in terms of DFS.
There you have it. All right, let's move on to good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Again, if you guys have any questions, throw them in the chat. There's a question from Patrick, which we will answer with this first fight in good fighter, bad fighter, and it is the second fight of the night: Shane Young versus Gabriel Miranda. Gabriel Miranda is in his second UFC fight, curly mustache and all. Gave up 6,000 DraftKings points to Benoit Saint-Denis, which, I mean, at this point, looking back now, probably one of the worst matchups possible. But Miranda in his second fight against Shane Young, who, to his credit, has been terrible. So is Miranda good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
Yeah, Miranda's a one-trick pony. He's an early submission or bust guy. He's not a good fighter because he has so many holes in his game, whether it be cardio, striking. I mean, he might even be a fraud with grappling for all we know. He's been facing a bunch of bums, but he has 15 career submissions, 1 career knockout. All 16 of his career wins come in under 6 minutes. Maybe it's fool's gold. We'll find out here, but the guy is a natural finisher. He's going to look for submissions any way possible, and he's probably going to gas out trying if he doesn't get them. So I think he's a bad fighter, but I think Shane Young's a bad fighter too. I know Shane Young has never been submitted, but I think it's a bad fighter and a good matchup for Miranda here.
I have 2 points. One, if I recall correctly, a lot of Miranda's tape was really tough to find, which is usually a pretty bad sign. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, like the more recent stuff was hard to find. There
Yeah.
was a bunch of older fights were out there, but yeah, that's always definitely a red flag. It's like why did the internet, or why would they scrub that tape off the internet? Like, what are they hiding there?
Yeah, exactly. And we have to talk about the line flip here, right? Since Shane Young missed weight on Friday by a significant margin, a lot of money coming in on Miranda. The line has moved to where he is now the favorite. You updated ownership this morning. He crossed that 30% projected ownership threshold on DraftKings. The model likes one side of this fight, and Jake, given Miranda's potential fraud alert, I just don't think you have any other option in tournaments to play the leverage with Young. We know how this ends up, but when you have Miranda as the favorite dog, and he's not even that good, we think, it seems like a good spot for Shane Young at low ownership on a 12 fight card.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like both sides of this one. You got like it's a low level fight. I think Miranda's either going to get the submission in the first 6 minutes, or he's going to gas out trying. And at that point, you just hope that Shane Young is aggressive enough to finish a corpse and doesn't just sit there leg kicking him for the last 10 minutes of the fight, which is my only concern. Why I wouldn't be like all in on playing both sides.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. All right, let's keep this moving. We talk about fighters less than 4 fights under their belt. Blood Diamond. We already mentioned the positive aspects of his opponent. Blood Diamond is 0-2 in the UFC. Famously scored 0 points in his debut against Jeremiah Wells. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
Oh yeah, Blood Diamond's terrible, man. One of the worst grapplers you'll ever see. It's a bad matchup.
All right, easy enough. Moving on, we have another matchup with two fighters less than 4 fights under the belt. Had the pleasure of watching both of these guys in Jacksonville at the live final. Chepe Mariscal, Jack Jenkins. Here's another opportunity where the favorite is likely going to be lower owned than the dog. Talk to me about these guys, Jake. Are they good or bad? Either one. Is this a good or bad matchup for either one?
I think they're both pretty good, man. Jenkins is coming off that Emmers split decision where most people thought he lost. Close fight. Like, go back, look at the numbers in round one, like almost dead even. That was the pivotal round. Jenkins won round two, Emmers won round three. But yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, it looked like visually, it definitely looked like he lost, and then he ended up winning that fight. But I still think he's a pretty decent fighter, man. He's well rounded. He's still a young guy. I mean, pretty young. I guess he's 30. Like, it seems like he's younger,
Yeah,
but still, 30 is not that old. I think he's pretty decent, man. I've seen some people, trashing him. I think a lot of that is just recency bias, and they're
100%.
probably bitter because they bet on Emmers.
Yep.
But nah, I think he's good. I think it's a tough matchup. Like, Mariscal is okay. I think it's a volatile matchup. Like, Mariscal will look really good. I pointed this out in the write ups, but he literally out grappled Pat Sabatini and then got out grappled by Sean Soriano. Like, if that doesn't make your head explode, I don't know what will. I mean, it's just crazy, man. He's like a really up and down fighter. So it's hard to know. Like, I could see Jenkins coming in and struggling. I could see Jenkins coming in, controlling Mariscal on the mat for 12 minutes and beating him up and putting up a big score. So I think it's a volatile matchup. I think both guys are good, but I think Mariscal is more inconsistent. And I mean, I would say you can say Jenkins is a little inconsistent too, based on his last performance, but I don't think we've seen the best from Jenkins. I think Mariscal basically, even though that was short notice and he was up a weight class, I think Mariscal basically put it all out there against Trevor Peek, and I think we're going to see some worse performances from him. I think he showed us like his best performance already, but we'll see, man. I picked Mariscal against Trevor Peek, so I liked him coming in. But yeah, I think I'm leaning definitely towards Jenkins in this one. I think it's going to be a good fight, though, man. I think both guys are live to win, but Mariscal is going to be super popular in DFS, and I think there's going to be a lot of recency bias here between people being down on Jenkins and really high on Mariscal. So it seems like an easy move for tournaments to get leverage by fading Mariscal here.
I mean, totally. It's a recency bias to the max. And if you just look at strength of schedule for the last one fight, Trevor Peek, terrible. Jamal Emmers, I think is decent. He's very skilled. Whether he's a great DFS player or not is a completely different question. But
Right.
two very different matchups here. Couldn't agree more about the recency bias playing a part here. All right. Next, we have, scrolling up, another matchup where the underdog is likely going to be more popular than the favorite here. Tyson Pedro, somehow, despite despite his recent fights, is going to be more popular than Anton Turkalj. Not saying Turkalj is a world beater by any means, but you're the expert here, Jake. Is Turkalj any good or not? The pleasure man, and is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for him?
Man, I think Turkalj is kind of a fraud, man. He looks super hittable. Like, he couldn't hold position on the mat against the striker in his last fight. He got reversed 4 times on the mat going against the striker. It was not a good look, man. I don't know, man. I think he needs to like back off the pleasure a little bit and get back to work a little bit more because he just seems like kind of like a clown right now. But he's a Swedish wrestler. He trains at All Star with Shamaev, so like he's got potential. He's got wrestling upside. I just think he's sort of fraudulent. I think he's super hittable. I don't know. I think he's got a lot of holes in his game that he needs to clean up. But I mean, we also Pedro completely laid out a stinker in his last fight, so we'll see. I mean, Pedro has historically been a round one or bust fighter, and Turcali has shown that he can go 3 hard rounds and land finishes later in fights. So it's another volatile matchup. We'll see if Pedro's improved his cardio. I believe he's training at City Kickboxing now. Maybe that's helped him out. Maybe the loss to Bakakis, like maybe that's gonna like flip a switch where he's like, okay, I can't just finish everyone in the first round. I need to actually have 3 rounds of cardio. I don't know. I think this is a volatile matchup that could go either way, but I kind of like Pedro to get a sub. We'll see, man. I think this is an interesting fight. I'm curious to see how it plays out, but long-winded way of saying I think Turcali's a bad fighter in a volatile matchup. And I'll call it a bad matchup because I think Tyson Pedro has pretty good submissions. And if Turcali's a one-dimensional wrestler, that means he's going to be at risk of getting submitted throughout the fight.
It's all very true. And Pedro looking to improve, maybe perhaps realizing that Harry Hunsucker and Ike Villanueva are no longer walking through those doors. I mean, you could not have given the guy 2 of the easier matchups possible on earth after a long layoff. So, all right, I digress. Next, we do have Austin Lane. We broke down this fight. You broke down this fight now twice with Tafa and Lane. Maybe just a quick just good or bad matchup, good or bad fighter, and then briefly any discussion on odds changes, circumstance changes between this fight since this was on that Jacksonville card that we previously talked about. Eye poking, whatever minute or whatever it was, ended the fight, no contest. So just maybe just like a context analysis of Tafa versus Lane Part 2.
Yeah, so that fight lasted 29 seconds. Tafa landed 0 strikes. Lane landed 3. And I think everyone was like, oh, damn, Lane is huge. He's landing these kicks. Like, Tafa is struggling to find his range. But the thing about Lane is the reason he's terrible is because he cannot take a punch. And he didn't have to take a punch in that fight. So all people saw was how big he is. So I thought it was interesting that Tafa opened as a bigger favorite on this card than that card because it seems like everyone was kind of like, maybe Lane, he's bigger, he's more athletic. Tafa's just like a big fat heavyweight. I'm kind of surprised. And I mean, I think the line move kind of backs up my surprise that Tafa opened as a bigger favorite because then immediately people are like, oh, we can get Lane at a better price and they bet him. But Lane's an athletic guy, but it all just comes down to the fact that he has not shown the ability to take a punch, and he wasn't forced to show that in that 29-second fight because he didn't absorb any punches. So my opinion hasn't changed. He's a big guy. He's athletic. Tafa's going to look bad if he gets taken down, but Lane's going to look really bad if he gets punched in the face, and that's what I'm waiting to see here.
All right, fair enough. That makes a ton of sense. And I think we've covered everybody finally. Yep, all right, we're good to go. All right, we have just a couple minutes left here in the show. Just a quick reminder, if you like what you've seen so far, make sure you are subscribed here on YouTube. That'll get you notified whenever we go live or upload pre-recorded videos. It depends on the size of the slate, timing. NFL is back, so timing is going to change. Being subscribed here on YouTube is the best way just to get notified whenever we put out a UFC DFS video. Give us a thumbs up if you like the content. Again, that just lets us know, helps us out in the algorithm. The more help we get, we appreciate, as always. Let's finish out here, Jake. Favorite prize fix play, favorite fight to target, stream parlay. We'll keep this very brief. Favorite prize fix play, you see promo code 100% deposit match bonus with promo code Occupy Prize Picks. Jake, what do you got this week?
Yeah, I think this is a smash spot for Manel Kape. The line's a little bit high, but I still like it, man. Over 112.5 points. Remember, you get takedowns defended on Prize Picks still, and we saw Dos Santos just kind of wildly shoot for a bunch of takedowns in his last fight. That could help him. But I think the finish is going to happen for Kape. I think he hits over that, so I like that line, even though it, at first glance, it seems a little on the high side.
It does seem a little on the high side. I agree. But again, if we're going to ask for a matchup for him to hit, it's certainly this one. All right, fight the target. I mean, based on if you guys have had your ears open for the past 30 minutes, it seems like there's a lot of fights at target, a lot of volatile matchups. If you had to pick one for the show, Jake, which fight do you think that whoever wins is likely to score extremely well?
Yeah, man, it's literally like almost every fight on the card, and you can kind of poke holes in a lot of them. I kind of gave out the obvious one in the plug, which was Volkov, Tai Tuivasa. But I know a lot of people are on the over there, which is kind of interesting. I think someone's getting knocked out, man. Every time I've ever bet an over on Tai Tuivasa, someone has always gotten knocked out. So I'm kind of over betting the overs
A
on
little
his
gun
fights.
shy.
Yeah. So, but I mean, honestly, man, throw a dart and it's a fight to target here. Like the Ulberg Jung, like whoever wins that's going to score well. Like Young Miranda, as long as it's not Miranda flopping around on his back and Young kicking his legs for 15 minutes. Like there's so many fights, man. So it's a tricky week to just be like, this is the one you have to target because it's like half the fights on the card.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. All right, you mentioned the Ulberg and Jung fight. That's a great transition to our stream parlay. Ulberg, one of the most popular fighters on the card, as you mentioned in Discord earlier today when one of our members had a question. Ulberg, fantastic striker, fantastic finisher, lots of holes and unknowns to his game: cardio, takedown, grappling, defense. Facing Jung, who has the opportunity to exploit all of those. So for my leg of the stream parlay, Jake, I'm going to go Dawoon Jung by decision. If I can find him on DraftKings, there he is. Dawoon Jung by decision, plus 700. A fantastic line here. Not sure if he finishes Ulberg. Maybe gets a late finish if Ulberg does gas. But I could certainly see a wrestling heavy decision win here. I know you do as well. So Jung plus 700 decision win is my side of the leg parlay, stream parlay.
Yeah, I like it, man. I think there's a lot of value there. He could definitely just out wrestle his way to a decision. I mean, is he going to be sweaty and greasy for sure? Like the first round, he has to not die. Then the last two rounds, he has to Ulberg has to not completely gas out, or Jung finishes him. But man, plus 700 for a decision, like, come on, like that line's too good to pass up on. I'll go with sort of like a chalky one here, but I think it's like there's too much value. Hopefully they haven't moved it yet. They hadn't last I checked. Miranda round one sub was plus 650 when I checked earlier. His money line is now negative 105, and I believe 13 of his 16 career wins have come by round one submission. I mean, another one was a round one KO, and they had 2 second round submissions in the opening minute of round two. So hard not. I mean, it's just a value, man. Like it might not hit, but you got to bet it. So we put those together. It's plus 5,900, so nice little 59 to 1 on the Jung decision and the Miranda round one sub.
59 to 1. All right, man. We won a Chevy Volt 2 weeks ago. It's Lambo time. 59 to 1. Love that. I mean, Miranda, that's just a crazy line when I mean, for me, that seems like most of his win equity. I'm not sure how else he wins this fight outside of a quick sub. Can't wait to see how.
I mean, totally.
Can't wait to see how I'm wrong about that. So, all right, guys, that'll do it for the show. Check out Jake's work, MMADFS.com. Lots of free content and membership-only content at MMADFS.com. The sheet breaks down every single fight for free from a betting and DFS perspective. The archive, you can check out historical DraftKings slates, get a look at pricing, ownership, just get a feel for how they translate to current slates. Jake has a Patreon where he has all sorts of premium content with projections, bets early in the week, more DFS information. Make sure you go check that out as well. OccupyFantasy.com, the daily plug's been up since last night. Jake also writes that. Top plays, lineup construction tips, some of his favorite bets that remain on the card after lines have moved. Our Occupy model ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership. And our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 UFC DFS lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings. Literally everything you need for UFC DFS combined with these two sites. So make sure you go check that out. Again, we say this every week. We know there are many of you that watch this that just want free information. There's no problem with that. And you're never going to pay for content. That's fine. If you want that extra edge, you want to be that person that you go into your DFS contest and you know I have more information than most of my opponents, then check out MMADFS.com and OccupyFantasy.com, and that's how you get that edge. So for Jake, follow him on Twitter at DFS_MMA. I'm at Brian Jester FF from Occupy Fantasy. Thank you for listening. Good luck and enjoy UFC 293.